Operation Dingo, the biggest RLI counterinsurgency operation of the Rhodesian Bush War. The plan had been in the making for over a year and had gone through 12 revisions before the actual operation commenced. Severely crippled militarily due to the South Africans' withdrawal from the country in 1976, the Rhodesians would continue their fight by employing their signature Fire Force tactic, but this time on the biggest scale the war had ever seen. According to Dr. J.R.T. Woods, the RLI managed to eliminate a total of 6,000 Zanla forces out of a suspected strength of 10,000 at New Farm and another 5,000 at Tembué. Just a little background on the two Zanla complexes. New Farm was held in regard as a multi-functioning forward operations base that was located on Adriano's farmland in Chimoio, Mozambique. It was home to 10,000 military, political, and civilian occupants, and in its entirety, the base consisted of the farmhouse, aka the White House, which was the ZANU Party headquarters, Camp 1, that was used for military recruit training located in the north, Camp 2, used for engineering, explosives, and anti-aircraft training that was home to the guerrillas trained in China, Yugoslavia, and Tanzania located in the south, a military training camp for females located in the main forward operation base, Chipetto College of Ideology for political indoctrination and propaganda, a camp hospital, a gynecology clinic, a rehab center for disabled and wounded guerrillas, an internal security and intelligence center that doubled as a prison, and an ordnance supply and vehicle camp, all surrounded by an extensive network of trench systems filled with RPGs, Strelas, and anti-aircraft guns scattered all along the perimeter of the base. Unlike New Farm, the base at Tembué, located 350 miles north, was significantly smaller, housing only 5,000 guerrillas. Camp A served as a guerrilla training camp, and to its south, Camp B and C were used to house fully trained insurgent fighters who awaited orders to be sent to Rhodesia. This base had also been heavily defended by multiple trench systems and anti-aircraft guns. The Rhodesians' manpower to take on such an aggressively large target was absolutely ludicrous in their severely understrength position. As I mentioned before, South Africa pulled out of Rhodesia after a dispute over Operation Eland, which I can get into at a later time. But just understand that Rhodesia at this time only has one DC-8 cargo plane that was on loan to them from a guy named Jack Malik, 6 Canberra light bombers, 9 Hawker bombers, 6 Vampire bombers, 7 Dakota Skytrains, 10 K-Car helicopters secretly imported from South Africa, 22 G-Car helicopters, and a total of 200 RLI and SAS soldiers at their disposal to take on not only one, but 2 Zanla bases sequentially. The plan was to destroy New Farm, reorganize, and destroy Tembué. The mission could be thought of as suicide, but not to the Rhodesians. On the morning of November 23, 1977, at 7:45, what sounded like an entire bomber squadron came barreling over the base. Reactively, the Zanla forces raced to take positions as they feared for an imminent bombing run, but nothing happened. What the Zanla fighters thought was a squadron of bombers was actually a DC-8 cargo plane. You see, this is all part of the Rhodesians' elaborate ruse. When a second barreling sound of aircraft came in 4 minutes later, the Zanla forces were complacent and thought nothing of it. This mistake by the Zanla forces gave the Rhodesian aircraft little to no resistance, and in a matter of minutes, 9 Hunter bombers split up into 3 sections, each bombed their respective targets. Red Section took part in bombing ZANU Party headquarters, which dealt a devastating blow to their leadership throughout the battle. Blue Section was assigned to take out Camp 2, and Gold Section took out the Chipetto College of Ideology, probably just a big ol' F you to communism. Classic Rhodesians. Immediately after the 900 bombers had completed their precision run, the Rhodesians sent in the Green Section, which was made up of 4 Canberra bombers. 1 to restrike Camp 2, and the other 3 to strike the core of the complex and incite almost total chaos within the perimeter. Only a few brave Zanla soldiers realized that to stay alive, they'd have to fight. These men raced towards the AA guns to commence a counterattack on the aircraft, but unfortunately for these courageous individuals, the Rhodesians' skill with the pilots was just too great. The 9 Hunters commenced gun runs across the perimeter, and one by one strafed the AA guns into almost total annihilation. All while this intense firefight is happening, the 6 Vampire bombers were going on a little side quest. Their mission was to destroy Camp 1, and even though the Vampires caught the recruits completely out in the open, they lacked the firepower to deal a massively devastating blow to the camp. Out of roughly 700 recruits at the camp, they managed to shoot down one of the Vampires and cause a fatal crash landing of the pilot, Philip Haig. Regardless of this loss, for the time being, the Vampires were effective in neutralizing the camp and prohibited the recruits from reinforcing the main base. With the AA guns almost completely out of commission and the complex in a total state of disarray, 6 Dakota Skytrains arriving at 8:03 met little resistance and were successful in their air assault of 144 RLI and SAS troops into a V formation that stretched just a little over 4 miles at the southeastern end of the main base. This V formation established a blocking force to prohibit the guerrillas from escaping to the south. This hastily established position caught the retreating forces off guard, and in the mass confusion, many Zanla fighters ran directly into Rhodesian machine gun fire. Most likely because they could hear at the northwest end of the base the 10 G-car helicopters inserting 40 RLI commandos. This set up a second blocking position to create a U-shaped formation. The RLI encountered fierce but overall ineffective small arms fire from the Zanla forces, who attempted to fight off the infill of troops. With this now third wall established, the Rhodesians plugged their final gap with 6 K-cars equipped with 20mm cannons that laid copious amounts of suppressive fire across the northeastern end of the base. As the encirclement commenced, 4 separate K-cars were split up and sent to camps 1 and 2 to catch and eliminate any further resistance. Although it was insignificant, the 2 K-cars that were tasked to sweep Camp 2 were met with intense small arms fire from the guerrillas that forced them to withdraw. To eliminate the threat, the Rhodesians called back in a section of hunters to sweep the camp instead, effectively decimating the insurgents. Meanwhile, as the battle raged on at the complex, a lucky shot from a Zanla machine gunner severely damaged the Command G-car that held the operational commanders Norman Walsh and Brian Robinson. This lucky shot forced the bird to go back for repairs to the FOB that was 15 miles north of the objective. This unfortunately would leave the RLI leaderless for almost an hour due to the lack of communication resources between each unit. But thanks to their air superiority, it prohibited any insurgent forces from regrouping for a counterattack. Regardless, this was never the guerrillas' plan, and the Zanla forces who managed to survive the onslaught capitalized on this window. They narrowly escaped death through the gaps in the Rhodesian lines. You have to think, like I said, the Rhodesian army is spread thin for this operation. Soon after the Command G-car re-entered the battle space, Commander Walsh ordered one final bombardment of the base by freshly refueled and re-equipped Canberra bombers. As the bombardment finished, the ground forces were ordered to sweep through the kill zone and consolidate in the center for retasking. Upon executing this order, the Rhodesian forces came across multiple large groups of guerrillas who managed to survive in the trench systems surrounding the base. Surprisingly, for the extremely thin line of encircling troops, they managed to snuff out these heavy pockets of resistance, while only sustaining one fatality, Franz No, who was killed by a female Zanla soldier. Despite encountering fierce resistance, the SAS and RLI managed to sweep in from the south effectively, while the 40 RLI soldiers at the northwest perimeter swept through the trenches of the base, but could not break through to the center due to a massed force of insurgents located at the Takarita guerrilla camp. These Zanla fighters were eventually destroyed, but only after close air support from a K-car gunship. It was now 13:30 and the operation was far from over. Into their 5th hour of battle, the executive decision to leave behind half of their ground forces at New Farm to remain overnight was in place. This allowed the RLI and SAS to complete a comprehensive sweep of the area, destroy any remaining combatants, destroy or recapture any military logistics, and finally, search for any military intelligence. In their comprehensive sweep, the Rhodesians managed to load multiple G-cars to the brim with AKs, RPDs, RPGs, grenades. You get the picture. The Rhodesians had also been lucky enough to find multiple stacks of Zanla and Zanu paperwork. Funny enough, within these documents laid a Mozambican dossier of Operation Eland which showed vindication to the Rhodesians' claims, which I can go over in another video, but to give you the down and dirty of the situation, Rhodesia claimed they struck a legitimate military target, and after the strike, the Zanlu party claimed it to be a massacre of innocent civilians. Regardless, as for half of the Rhodesian forces left behind, they secured a defendable position and set up a patrol base for the night. They met little resistance overnight, and in the morning they traveled 4 miles up the road to Camp 1 to do a comprehensive sweep and collection of the area. Here, the remaining RLI and SAS were surprised to find a small amount of Zanla KIA. Out of the prior 700 recruits, there were only 70 deceased insurgents lying before them. Rhodesia decided to take this as a learning lesson and adjust for further operations. After the consolidation of weapons and logistics, the full withdrawal of New Farm by the Rhodesian forces had been completed. By this time, it had already been 36 hours since the beginning of the operation, and the Rhodesians were just getting started. Prior to hitting their target at Tembué on Saturday the 26th, Rhodesian High Command decided to rest and refit the men at the Mount Darwin Air Base. Here, the men were given a hot meal and an unlimited amount of beer to drink that night as a pseudo-reward for the job at New Farm. In the early hours of the 26th, a refuel and resupply unit were dropped into the Mozambican territory on a mountain plateau called the Train. From here, it would give the Rhodesian aircraft the same refuel and resupply advantages as the makeshift base that was set up before striking New Farm. At 0630, the Rhodesian Air Force, minus the crash Vampire, set off for Tembué. And arriving exactly at 08, 9 hunters separated into red, blue, and gold section each conducted a coordinated bombing on the 3 camps, followed by green section, the 4 Canberra bombers, who led a respective attack on Camp C since it housed the most experienced guerrillas. After these initial strikes, the 9 hunters returned to conduct the same tactic of encircling the camp and targeting their AA guns. Luckily for the Rhodesians, this was an easy task since the camps were not as robust in their anti-aircraft arsenal as they were at New Farm. In a matter of 4 minutes, the hunters had almost completely decimated all of the AA guns at each camp, which gave the conditions set for the 5 Vampire bombers to make a deliberate and repeated strike on Camp A throughout the attack. While the Vampires were wreaking havoc at Camp A, the Rhodesians sent in multiple K-car gunships to hover over and strafe Camps B and C. This tactic was less about lethality and more so employed as a distraction to allow the Dakotas to make 3 coordinated drops of RLI and SES units around the camps. At 8:25, the men on the ground were ordered to push towards their objective, and ran into very minimal retreating Zanla forces in defensive fire. As the encircling troops pushed their way through the trench system, they found the trenches to be almost completely empty, which must have been a shock to the Rhodesians, since the defensive fighting at New Farm had been a lot greater. Just 2 hours after the attack commenced, the resistance had capitulated and the Rhodesians were already in a position to sweep the base like they had done previously at New Farm. As the sweep commenced, the Rhodesians' worst fears were realized. The parade grounds, that were supposed to be littered with enemy corpses, were nearly empty. Throughout interrogation of surviving Zanla soldiers and further investigation, the Rhodesians came to learn that the night prior to the attack, Zanla headquarters ordered the transfer of 1,500 of their best-trained guerrillas from Tembué. However, not all was lost. The Rhodesians still managed to score multiple large caches of weapons and supplies. And in a further interrogation session of a Zanla survivor, the Rhodesians were able to figure out that 1,000 out of the 1,500 guerrillas had been moved 15 miles north to the Usata camp. Although a planned ground strike on the camp was out of the picture for the Rhodesian logistics, the High Command decided to take the initiative. With 3 hunters and 4 Canberra bombers, the Rhodesian Air Force conducted a classic firebomb strike of the camp instead. Surprisingly, in the aftermath of the strike, half of the camp structures were destroyed, along with a significant number of Zanla casualties. As the scavenging at Tembué completed, some men were left behind in order to fit all the newly acquired weapons and supplies into the aircraft, and just a few minutes after the last bird was up in the air, Mother Nature decided to join the party. A huge rainstorm engulfed the area, forcing the men on the ground to hunker down for the night since the winds were too strong for any aircraft operations. However, for the birds already in the air, they began to race south to avoid the storm. Unfortunately, in this endeavor, due to the dangerously low fuel level, one of the 6 G cars hauling troops that was a part of Pink Squadron was forced into an emergency landing on a remote island on the Carabassa. In fear of the Mozambican Navy, the men on the bird set up in a defensive position to wait for help to arrive. Fortunately, for the men on the ground, none other than Jack Malik himself flew low through the intense storm in this DC-8 cargo plane to drop the men fuel drums. The balls on this man, I swear. If you've never heard of Jack, then I recommend looking him up. Back at Tembué, the remaining soldiers on the ground were met with a couple little skirmishes throughout the night, but nothing like the sleepless night they experienced at New Farm. The next morning, in a similar fashion to New Farm, the commandos made their way north to the recruit camp. As they reached Camp A, they were heavily ambushed by a small band of remaining Zanla recruits. Unfortunately for these brave recruits, they were no match for the battle-hardened RLI and SAS troops who made quick work of eliminating and dispersing the fighters. After completely clearing Camp A, at 12 o'clock on Sunday the 27th, the remaining forces left behind were finally evacuated. In a little under an hour, the men were safely back behind Rhodesian lines. In the aftermath of this entire operation that lasted just over 100 hours, the Rhodesian success was almost too astonishing to believe. After killing and wounding an estimate of 6,000 Zanla personnel at both bases, the Rhodesians only received 10 casualties, 2 killed in action and 8 wounded in action. You can call it a miracle, good training, experience, or whatever else, but what is clear is that the Zanla's fighting capabilities were diminished by 20 to 30% over the 5-day operation. Without a doubt, a huge win for the Rhodesians. Unsurprisingly, Operation Dingo's legacy is contested. Amongst the Rhodesians, Dingo was a decisive battle for the fate of the Rhodesian state. Even after the Lancaster House Agreement, Dingo was still seen as a key role to the legitimacy of Rhodesia. Yet, for many Zimbabweans, the event of Operation Dingo has been immortalized as the Chimoio and Tembué massacres. And today, a monument in Chimoio commemorates the fallen as heroes. Their names are printed as a testament to their sacrifice and their struggle to liberate Zimbabwe. With all that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!